The rifle was on the table, not put away, not propped against the wall the way a woman puts a rifle when the day is done and the work is finished. On the table, horizontal, cleaned the night before, the oil still faintly present in the air of that kitchen. He noticed it the moment he stepped inside, the way he noticed everything, not because he was looking, because he had long ago stopped being able to stop looking. He had ridden in at dusk. Before this story starts, subscribe and tell me in the comments the name of someone who fought for what was theirs when nobody thought they could win. Just their name, nothing else. I read every comment. Now let's ride 3 days from the Pecos, a boundary problem on the Hennessy land that had taken longer than planned and had resolved in a way nobody had wanted but everybody had accepted. He had come back the way he always came back, quietly, from the South Ridge, reading the property before he reached it, the way a man reads a room before he walks into it. Something was different. He couldn't have told you what. Not yet. The house was standing. The barn was standing. The horses were in the paddock, 3 of them, which was one more than he'd left. The chimney had smoke. Everything looked from the ridge the way it was supposed to look. But the rifle was on the table, and Nora Calloway did not leave rifles on tables. Calloway Creek Ranch, West Texas, autumn of 1887. He had met her the previous spring, 7 months before, in the way that most things happened out here. Not planned, not arranged. Forced by circumstance into proximity and then into something neither of them had gone looking for. She was the widow of Dale Calloway, who had built the ranch from nothing in 11 years and had died of a fever in March, leaving behind 40 head of cattle, a water deed to the creek, 200 acres of decent grass, and a woman who had decided in the quiet week after the funeral that she was not leaving. The men who had expected her to leave had been watching ever since. He understood, in the way he understood most things, that the ranch was not really about the ranch. It never was out here. It was about the water. The creek that ran through the eastern corner of the Calloway property was the only reliable water source in a 12-mile radius. In a dry year, which every year was becoming, it was the difference between a herd that survived and a herd that didn't. 3 operations to the north and east of the Calloway land had been watching that creek, with an attention that had grown more focused, as the summer dried everything else out. The largest of those operations was owned by a man named Breckenridge, Harlan Breckenridge. He had not yet met Harlan Breckenridge. He was about to. Let me stop here for a moment because I want to tell you something about West Texas in the autumn of 1887 that most people who weren't there don't fully understand. The drought cycle of the mid-1880s had done something to the land and to the men who depended on it that went beyond economics. The great die-up of 1886, when blizzards and drought killed an estimated 80% of the open-range cattle in some counties, had not just destroyed herds. It had destroyed a certain kind of confidence. The confidence of men who had believed that the land was infinite, that the grass would always come back, that water would always flow. That confidence died in the winter of '86, and what replaced it was something harder. Something that looked at a neighbor's water rights, not as his but as a resource that could not be allowed to be wasted on an operation too small to use it correctly. Harlan Breckenridge had survived the die-up, barely. He had reduced his herd by 2/3 and had spent the following year expanding his land base in every direction available to him. He had purchased 3 ranches. He had absorbed 2 more through legal pressure, boundary disputes, mortgage foreclosures that he had quietly facilitated. He was, by the autumn of 1887, one of the 10 largest landholders in the county. The Calloway Creek water deed was the one piece he needed and could not buy, because Nora Calloway was not selling. He had underestimated her 4 times. He was about to make it 5. The extra horse in the paddock was a gray, tall, trail-worn, the saddle still on. Nobody unsaddled a horse they planned to ride out on soon. He came in from the east side of the barn, not the gate. Old habit. The kind of habit that had kept him alive long enough to develop other habits. He heard the voice before he reached the kitchen window. Male, unhurried. The voice of a man conducting a business meeting in someone else's house and finding the surroundings acceptable. He stopped at the window. 2 men at the kitchen table. Nora standing at the far end, the rifle on the table between them, equidistant, belonging to no one for the moment and therefore to everyone. The man talking was not large, 45, perhaps 50. The build of someone who had done physical work for 20 years and had spent the last 10 telling other people to do it instead. A suit coat that cost more than most men in this county made in 3 months. Hair oiled and parted with the precision of a man who understood that appearance was a form of communication. The second man was younger, stood near the door, the position of a man whose job was the door. He looked at Nora. She was listening to the man in the suit coat the way she listened to things she had already decided about and was not going to change her mind on, which was with a stillness so complete it read, to people who did not know her, as uncertainty. It was not uncertainty, he knew what it was. He had watched her listen that way to a banker from Abilene, to a circuit judge, to a cattle buyer, who had tried to talk her into accepting 40 cents on the dollar for her spring calves. She had not accepted 40 cents on the dollar. She had found a different buyer. The man in the suit coat was explaining something about shared resources and regional development, and the mutual benefit of consolidated water management, which was a long way of saying what Breckenridge's men had been saying to her in shorter words for 6 months. The answer was the same regardless of the length of the sentence. He moved to the back door. Here is what they didn't understand about Nora Calloway. She had not been a rancher's wife the way that phrase is usually meant. She had not been the woman in the house while the ranching happened outside. Dale Calloway had been a good man and a capable rancher, and he had understood, within a year of marrying her, that she was going to learn everything he knew and that this was not a threat. It was a fact. She had learned the cattle. She had learned the water rights, the legal language of the deed, the survey markers, the seasonal flow patterns of the creek, and what they meant for grazing rotation. She had learned the land the way some people learn a language completely until she thought in it. When Dale died, she did not lose a rancher. She lost a partner. The ranch did not suffer. The ranch continued because she continued it. What Breckenridge's people had researched was Dale Calloway's operation. They had not researched Nora's. The records they had pulled were his records, his decisions, his boundaries. They had not understood that by 1886 those records were joint records. That by 1887, several months after his death, they were entirely hers. She knew the water deed better than the man who had drafted it. She knew the county survey lines within 2 feet. She knew every clause in the water rights law that applied to her creek, and she knew the 2 clauses that Breckenridge's lawyers had been trying to use against her, and she knew why they didn't apply. Breckenridge had sent his most polished man. He had sent him to a woman who had been 3 steps ahead of this conversation for 4 months. He came through the back door at the moment the man in the suit coat said something about a generous offer that wouldn't be available indefinitely. The kitchen rearranged itself. The man near the door moved. He was fast. Younger men often are. But fast and positioned are 2 different things, and the young man near the door had been standing with his attention on Norah, which was a reasonable place to put it until it wasn't. He was not fast enough. The man in the suit coat looked at the doorway, at the stranger, and at the revolver, and did the arithmetic of the room with the rapid, focused attention of someone who had been in rooms like this before, though perhaps not exactly like this. He set his hat on the table. The universal language. "I represent Harlan Breckenridge," he said. His voice had changed. The business meeting tone had been replaced by something more honest. "This is a legal negotiation. I want to be clear about that." He looked at Norah. She had not moved. The rifle was still on the table, equidistant, belonging to no one. She looked at him. Something passed between them that didn't require words. The understanding of 2 people who had spent 7 months learning each other's silences. "Mr. Aldgate," Norah said to the man in the suit coat, "I've told you, and I've told Breckenridge, and I've told the 3 men he sent before you. The answer is no." Aldgate was quiet for a moment. The calculation of a professional who has been given one instruction and has just encountered the wall that instruction cannot move. "He understands you have concerns," Aldgate said. "He's prepared to address them directly. A meeting, his office in Presidio. Nothing further than that." She looked at the rifle on the table, not reaching for it, acknowledging it. "The way you acknowledge a truth. Tell him," she said, "that the answer to that is also no. Tell him what I told his surveyor in August. Tell him what I told the men he sent in September. And tell him that the next person he sends here is going to have a conversation with a county sheriff and a water rights attorney, and that I've already spoken to both of them." Aldgate looked at the revolver, looked at the man holding it. He stood. He picked up his hat. He was a professional, and professionals understood when the variables had changed beyond what the original instruction accounted for. The young man near the door was looking at the floor. "Good evening, Mrs. Calloway," Aldgate said. They left. The gray horse left the paddock at a walk. He watched it from the window until it was past the south bend in the road and gone. Behind him, Norah put the rifle back in its place against the wall, not on the table, against the wall, the position of a rifle when the day is done. She put a pot on the stove without being asked. He sat at the table. How long, he said. Since noon. He measured the coffee with the focus of someone doing something with their hands while their mind worked on something else. They came while I was in the north pasture. I saw the gray from the fence line. I came back slow. She turned. He wasn't alone when he started. There were two more on the road, a quarter-mile out. They didn't come in, watching, in case I tried to ride for help. He looked at the window. They'll go back to Breckenridge tonight, she said, and Breckenridge will decide the next move. She poured the coffee. What Aldgate doesn't know is what I know about the next move. He looked at her. He's been buying up the eastern water claims all fall, quietly. She sat across from him. 3 of them. Small parcels, old deeds, the kind that have been sitting in county records for 15 years without anybody paying attention to them. She put her hands around the cup. If he completes the pattern, the Calloway Creek deed becomes landlocked, legally surrounded. He can't take the water, but he can make it impossible for me to use it commercially. He can make it so the cattle operation is no longer viable. He was quiet for a moment. How long has he been working this? Since spring. She looked at him evenly. Since Dale died. She set the cup down. He's been patient, I'll give him that. Methodical. He's been 3 moves ahead of this conversation since March. She paused. Almost 3 moves ahead. Almost. He looked at her. The 3rd parcel, she said. The Mace deed. Eastern corner, filed 1871. Breckenridge's man tried to purchase it 6 weeks ago. She almost smiled. I purchased it 5 weeks ago. I want to stop here because I think this matters, and I don't want you to miss it. The land wars of West Texas in the 1880s were not simply fought by men with guns. Though there were men with guns and the guns were used, they were fought in county deed offices, in the language of water rights legislation, in the quiet accumulation of small parcels that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. The men who won those wars were not always the men with the most guns. They were the men, and sometimes the women, who understood that the real terrain was paper. Nora Calloway had understood this before most of the men fighting around her had understood it. She had a lawyer in Abilene who she wrote to twice a month. She had a copy of the Texas water rights statutes annotated in her own handwriting, specific clauses underlined, her margin notes precise and argued. She had been to the county deed office in Presidio 4 times in 7 months, each time on a day she had told no one about in advance. Breckenridge was fighting the war he knew how to fight. She was fighting a different war entirely. The Mace deed was the keystone. Without it, Breckenridge's eastern encirclement was a fence with a gap in it. With it in her possession, the encirclement could not be completed. The commercial viability of the Calloway Creek water rights was intact. The ranch was intact. She had done this without telling him. Not because she didn't trust him, because she had done it before he arrived. Because she had been doing it since March, since Dale died, since the first polite letter from a Breckenridge attorney had arrived in her mailbox like a stone thrown through a window with a bow tied around it. He sat with this for a moment. That's the whole thing, isn't it? He said. She looked at him. Yes, she picked up the cup. But he doesn't know I have it yet. And when he finds out, she was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes before the truth. He'll stop being methodical, she said. They sat with that. The stove made its sound. Outside, the autumn dark had settled completely over the West Texas plain, the particular darkness of a country that has no town lights for 40 miles in any direction, the darkness that sits on the land like a weight and makes the stars above it look not decorative but structural, as if the sky were holding something up. He looked at the window. 3 men in the yard at Aldgate's instruction was a business meeting. What comes next won't be a business meeting. She looked at the rifle against the wall. I know. How many does Breckenridge run? Regular hands 12. He's got 4 men who aren't regular hands. She said it the way she said things she had been thinking about for a long time and had reached the end of. She had been cataloging Breckenridge for months. She had been accumulating him the way she accumulated everything. He thought about the gray horse on the road south. He thought about the 2 riders a quarter-mile out who had not come in. He thought about what a man like Breckenridge did when a methodical plan encountered an obstacle it had not planned for. He thought about the rifle against the wall and the rifle on the table and the difference between them. Tomorrow, he said. She looked at him. He won't wait. He looked at her directly. He found out tonight that Aldgate didn't get it done. By morning, he'll know about the Mace deed. By tomorrow afternoon, he'll be past methodical. She was quiet. He won't come himself, she said. No. He looked at the window. But he'll send more than Aldgate. The night passed the way nights passed before things happened. Slowly at the start, then faster, the hours compressing toward the hinge point without asking permission. He slept in the chair nearest the door, the way he slept in places that were not yet safe, which was most places. Nora slept in the room she had shared with Dale Calloway and had slept in alone for 7 months. She slept, he knew, the way capable people slept before difficulty. Completely, without drama. Storing the rest the way you store water before a dry season. He was at the south window before first light. The road was empty. For now. He saddled his horse in the barn dark. The familiar movements, the particular way this horse accepted the bit. Patient and known. He thought about the 4 men Breckenridge kept that were not regular hands, and about which direction they would come from, and about what Breckenridge's most likely calculation was for the morning. Then he heard it, not hooves, not yet. The kind of pre-sound that precedes hooves on dry ground. The disturbance in the air, the change in the texture of the silence that a man who has lived by paying attention learns to read the way other men read print. He came out of the barn, the road south, 3 riders, coming at a trot, not a run. The pace of men who had left before dawn and were arriving on schedule and had not bothered with urgency because they had done the arithmetic and the arithmetic was in their favor. He looked at the house. Nora was already in the doorway. She had the rifle, not against the wall, not on the table, in her hands. He looked at the 3 riders and at the rifle and at Nora in the doorway, and understood something that he had been understanding in pieces since March, and was understanding now whole. She had been in that doorway before he arrived. She would be in that doorway after he left. The doorway was hers. The rifle was hers. The ranch was hers. He was not the protection. He had never been the protection. He was something else entirely. Something neither of them had found a word for yet. Something that stood next to her in the doorway and faced the road with her and understood that the facing was done together. He walked to the doorway and stood beside her. The 3 riders came up the road at a trot. They slowed at the yard gate. They saw the rifle. They saw him. They stopped. The one in front looked at the 2 of them in the doorway with the expression of a man recalculating. He recalculated for a long moment. Here's what I think about when I think about that morning. Not the 3 riders, not what they said or what was back to them or how it ended, which is a story for another day. I think about the doorway, about what it means to stand in the entrance of something you built or inherited or refused to surrender, and to look out at the people who want it and to hold the line, not because you have no fear, but because the fear is smaller than the thing you're standing in front of. That's not a West Texas thing. That's not an 1887 thing. That's a human thing. Nora Calloway had been standing in that doorway since March, since the first letter. Since the first polite representative of Harlan Breckenridge had appeared on her road with a hat in hand and an offer that assumed she was tired. She was not tired. She had accumulated the Mace deed. She had annotated the water right statutes. She had written to her lawyer in Abilene twice a month. She had been fighting this war on its real terrain, which was paper and law and knowledge, while Breckenridge fought it on the terrain he understood, which was pressure and presence and the quiet suggestion of men on roads who weren't quite threatening anything but weren't quite not threatening it either. And she had been doing it, most of it, before anyone else arrived to help. That matters. I think that matters more than most of what I've told you today. The 3 riders on the road. The one in front looked at the rifle and at the man in the doorway and made the decision that Cord had made, and that Aldgate had made, and that every man Breckenridge had sent had eventually made when they arrived at the same wall. He looked at his 2 companions. Something passed between them, not words. They turned their horses. They rode back down the road south at the same trot they had arrived at, unhurried, but moving. The pace of men who have updated their assessment and are returning to the person who sent them with information that person is not going to want to hear. He watched them until the road bent and they were gone. Beside him, Nora lowered the rifle to her side. She did not lower it all the way, not yet. She looked at the road for a long moment. The long look of someone checking their work. He's going to go to the county, she said, when the riders don't work. He's going to try to find something in the water deed language, some technical problem, some lapsed clause. He looked at her. Let him look, she said. The certainty in it was not arrogance. It was the certainty of a woman who had read the deed more times than the man trying to break it. She turned and went back into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway for another moment, looking at the road. At the empty quiet of the West Texas morning arriving over the plain, the light coming in low and lateral, the particular golden indifference of a country that had been here before the people fighting over it and would be here after. He thought about Breckenridge in his office in Presidio, 50 miles north, receiving the report. He thought about what a man like that did next. He found out 2 days later, not from a rider, from a letter. Delivered by the county postal rider on a Wednesday morning on official stationery, bearing the seal of a Presidio law firm. Nora read it at the kitchen table without expression. She set it down, she pushed it across to him, he read it. Breckenridge was withdrawing all claims, all interest, all legal filings related to the Calloway Creek water deed and the adjacent parcels. The letter cited a mutual decision to pursue other regional opportunities. It was written in the language of men who have lost and are explaining the loss in words that don't use the word lost. He looked at her, she was already at the stove. "How?" he said. She poured the coffee, set the cup in front of him, sat down. "3 weeks ago I wrote to the Texas Land Commission," she said. "I filed a formal complaint regarding coordinated deed manipulation in Presidio County. I named 4 parcels. I named the pattern. I named Breckenridge." She looked at the letter on the table. "The Land Commission doesn't move fast. But Breckenridge has 14 operations in this state. He has investors. He has partners who read Land Commission filings the same morning they're submitted." She picked up her cup. "I didn't need the Land Commission to act. I needed Breckenridge's investors to see the filing." He sat with that for a moment. "You did this before Aldgate came." 3 weeks before. She looked at him evenly. The riders, the visits, Aldgate, that was all after. That was Breckenridge trying to close it before the investors noticed. She set the cup down. He ran out of time. He looked at the letter, at the official seal, at the careful language of a man dismantling a campaign without admitting it existed. "You beat him on paper," he said. She looked at the window. At the West Texas morning outside, the creek visible in the eastern distance, the particular blue of moving water in flat country, the thing that all of this had been about. "That's where it was always going to be won," she said, "or lost." She stood, picked up the letter, folded it once, set it on the shelf beside the water rights statutes, beside her annotated copy of the deed, beside the correspondence with the Abilene lawyer. The shelf of a woman who had understood from the beginning that the real weapons in this war had no weight to them. He looked at the shelf. He looked at the rifle against the wall. He looked at her. "Here is what I carry from this story. Not the 3 riders, not Aldgate in his suit coat, not even the doorway, though I think about the doorway. I carry the shelf with the statutes and the deed and the letters. The shelf that represents 7 months of work that nobody saw because it happened in the quiet, in the correspondence, in the deed office, on days she told no one about. The shelf that won the ranch before a single rider appeared on the road." Harlan Breckenridge had researched Dale Calloway's operation thoroughly. He had not researched Nora's. He had looked at who owned the land and had not looked at who understood it. That was the oversight that cost him everything. The creek ran that morning the way it always ran, without asking permission, without consulting the men who had spent a year fighting over it, moving south through the eastern corner of the Calloway property, crossing the line of the Mace deed, continuing into the dry country, beyond with the indifferent persistence of water that has been moving through this land since before any of them arrived, and will be moving through it long after all of them are gone. Nora stood at the kitchen window and looked at it. He stood beside her. The rifle was against the wall. The deed was on the shelf. The road south was empty and quiet and caught the early light the way West Texas roads do in autumn, gold and long and going somewhere that looks, from a distance, like it might be worth the ride. She looked at the creek. He looked at her. And the ranch, on that Wednesday morning in the autumn of 1887, was exactly what it had always been. Hers. That's the whole story. If it gave you something, drop a comment. Tell me your country. I read everyone. And if you're not yet subscribed, the button is right there. Until next time, partners.